In 1875, a young woman from Boston went looking for a new life in the brutal Arizona desert. But what she found instead was a secret so dark, it threatened to burn the entire territory to the ground. And the one man who could save her was the man everyone told her to fear the most. Sarah Miller stepped off the stagecoach and into a world of dust and heat. At just 22, she'd already buried both her parents, packed her life into a single trunk, and traveled 2,000 miles to find her only living relative. Her uncle William ran the trading post in a tiny settlement called Willow Creek. It wasn't much more than a handful of wooden buildings huddled together against the vast, unforgiving wilderness. It was harsh. It was wild. But as she watched the sun bleed across the distant mountains, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could be home. "You shouldn't wander so far from town, Miss Miller," a voice called out. It was Mr. Thompson, the old shopkeeper, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by the desert sun. He'd taken a kindly interest in her since she arrived. "Apache scouts were spotted near here just this morning." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter even in the warmth. "I was just watching the sunset, Mr. Thompson. It's so beautiful here." "Beauty can be a dangerous thing in these parts," he warned, his eyes scanning the horizon. He gently guided her back toward the trading post, where the warm lantern light spilled out into the twilight. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of leather, tobacco, and sweat. Cowboys haggled for supplies, and her Uncle William stood behind the counter, his face like stone as he argued with a prospector over the price of beans. When he saw Sarah, his eyes narrowed. "Where have you been, girl? The inventory isn't going to count itself." "I'm sorry, Uncle. I just needed some air." Sarah slipped behind the counter, feeling the familiar weight of his disapproval. He was a hard man, made harder by the frontier and the fever that had taken his wife years ago. Nothing she did ever seemed to be enough. She started arranging jars of peaches on a shelf, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. Then the door swung open, and every single person in the room went silent. 3 Apache men stepped inside. They moved with a quiet power that seemed to suck all the noise out of the air. Their faces were unreadable, their posture proud and unyielding. The man in the lead was the tallest, with shoulders as broad as the doorway he'd just walked through. His black hair was held back by a simple leather band, and his eyes were like chips of obsidian. They swept across the room, missing nothing, before they landed directly on Sarah. And they stayed there. A chill traced its way down her spine. Her uncle straightened up, his voice stiff and cautious. "Chief Wakin, what brings you to Willow Creek?" The Apache leader's gaze didn't waver from Sarah. He spoke in perfect measured English, his voice low and steady. "We come to trade." For the next hour, Sarah felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. The chief, whose name she learned was Tahoe, conducted his business with a calm, unnerving dignity. He never raised his voice, he never rushed, but his presence dominated the entire room. And through it all, his eyes kept finding their way back to her. It wasn't a leering look, not like some of the cowboys gave her. It was something else entirely, something deeper, more intense. It felt like he was looking right through her skin and into her soul. When he and his warriors finally left, the entire trading post seemed to exhale at once. Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath the whole time. "They won't be trouble," her uncle grumbled, trying to reassure the nervous customers. "Chief Wakin's people have kept the peace treaty. For now." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by her small window, writing in her journal by the light of a single candle. She described the Apache chief, his fierce face, his intelligent eyes. There was something more than just a warrior there. There was a depth she couldn't explain, a hidden current beneath the stoic surface. She felt a strange pull, a mix of fear and fascination that she couldn't shake. She had no idea that her life, as she knew it, was already over. 3 days later, the world ended. She woke to the sound of screaming and the smell of burning wood. The settlement was under attack. Flames leaped from the rooftops, painting the pre-dawn sky in horrifying shades of orange and red. Men on horseback, their faces painted in grotesque mockery of Indian war paint, galloped through the street, firing their rifles into the air. But these weren't Apache. Their skin was pale beneath the paint. They were white bandits, disguised to incite terror and hatred. In the chaos, Sarah was ripped away from her uncle. She ran, blind with panic, toward the creek bed, hoping to hide in the thick willows. But a rough hand clamped down on her arm, yanking her back. A man with a thick, greasy beard and teeth like rotting tombstones grinned down at her. "Look what we have here!" he snarled, dragging her toward his horse. Sarah fought back with everything she had. She kicked, she screamed, she clawed at his face, but he was too strong. He threw her to the ground and loomed over her. This was it. This was how she was going to die. Suddenly, a sound split the air. A high, piercing war cry that froze the blood in her veins. The bandit whirled around, his eyes wide with shock. An arrow was sticking out of his shoulder. He screamed in pain and surprise, clutching at the shaft as he stumbled backward. Sarah scrambled away, her heart hammering against her ribs, and looked up to see who had saved her. It was Chief Wakan, Tahoe. He and his warriors had arrived, not as raiders, but as hunters. They were pursuing the very same bandits who were now tearing her town apart. The world dissolved into a blur of motion. Before she could even process what was happening, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, and she was lifted from the ground. She was on Tahoe's horse, pulled tight against his chest as he wheeled the animal around and galloped away from the burning settlement. "Wait! My uncle!" she cried, twisting to look back at the flames. "Settlement is lost." Tahoe's voice was a low growl in her ear, his words clipped and urgent. "Too many bandits. You are safe with the Apache now." As they rode hard into the mountains, Sarah watched the only home she'd known in the West disappear behind a curtain of smoke. She didn't know if her uncle was alive or dead. She didn't know where she was being taken, or why. All she knew was that the fierce Apache chief, for reasons she couldn't possibly comprehend, had just saved her life. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new, cold fear crept in. He hadn't just saved her. He had taken her. Hours of hard riding brought them to a place that felt like another world. The Apache encampment was nestled in a hidden valley, a collection of hide-covered wickiups blending seamlessly into the landscape. Women looked up from their work as they arrived, their dark eyes full of questions. Children stopped their games to stare at the white woman with torn clothes and a soot-stained face. Tahoe swung himself off the horse and then lifted her down. Her legs were trembling so badly she could barely stand. Fear, exhaustion, and confusion washed over her in a dizzying wave. "Why did you bring me here?" she finally managed to ask, her voice shaking. The chief looked at her, his face as solemn as a judge. "The spirits showed me a vision. You belong with the Apache now." He paused, and his next words struck her like a physical blow. "You will become my wife." The world tilted on its axis. "Your wife? No. I can't. You don't understand." "It is decided," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned and began giving orders to his people in their native tongue. An elderly woman with a kind, wrinkled face approached Sarah and gently took her arm. "My mother will prepare you," Tahoe said over his shoulder, already walking away. As the old woman, whose name she would learn was Luna, led her toward a small wickiup, Sarah felt the hot sting of tears. She had come west looking for a new beginning, a place to belong. How had it come to this? A captive, forced to marry a man she barely knew, a stranger from a world so different from her own, it might as well have been the moon. It was a nightmare, a trap. But then, just before he disappeared from view, she glanced back at Tahoe, and for a split second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't the cold confidence of a warrior chief. It was uncertainty. A flash of vulnerability so brief she almost missed it. And in that moment, a new question took root in her terrified mind. What if he was just as trapped as she was? The days that followed were a blur of confusion and survival. Sarah was given her own small wickiup, a cozy dome-shaped home made of branches and hides. To her immense surprise and relief, Tahoe made no move to force the marriage. He kept his distance, watching her from afar with that same unreadable expression. He didn't treat her like a prisoner. He treated her like a guest, a very confusing, very important guest. His mother, Luna, became her silent teacher. Through gestures and a few shared words, the old woman taught Sarah the rhythms of Apache life. She learned to grind corn into flour, to scrape and treat animal hides until they were soft as cloth, and to identify the healing plants that grew in the mountains. Luna was patient, her weathered hands guiding Sarah's clumsy ones. Sometimes, when Sarah finally mastered a difficult task, the corner of the old woman's mouth would twitch into a small, rare smile. It was a language all its own. One evening, as Sarah sat by the fire outside her wickiup, watching the sparks dance into the night sky, Tahoe finally approached. He sat across from her, the firelight carving sharp angles on his face. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. "Why haven't you forced me to marry you?" she asked, the words rushing out. Tahoe stared into the flames for a long time before he answered. An Apache warrior does not force a woman. A wife must come to her husband's fire willingly. Only then is it a true marriage. Sarah was stunned. This wasn't the answer of a savage captor. Then why bring me here at all? Why say those words to me? "I saw you," he said, his voice low. "In the trading post. Your eyes were the color of the mountain sky after a storm. I saw a strong spirit inside you." He paused, struggling to find the right English words. Then, the vision came. "I saw my village burning. I saw you standing beside me, not in fear, but in strength. I knew then that the spirits had marked you, that you are important to the future of my people." A vision? The idea seemed ridiculous to her practical Boston mind. "You kidnapped me because of a dream?" His expression hardened just a little. "It was not a dream. It was a vision. The spirits speak to those who know how to listen. The white man has forgotten how." He looked away, his jaw tight. Sarah's mind was racing. "What about my uncle? Is he alive? My scouts have watched the settlement. Some buildings still stand. Some people are returning. Your uncle lives, but his leg was badly broken in the attack." A wave of relief washed over her, so powerful it almost made her dizzy. He was alive. "Then I have to go back. I have to see him." "It is not safe," Tahoe stated, his voice firm. "The bandits who attacked your town still roam these lands. They will return, looking for anything, or anyone, they missed. Here, you are protected." "Protected as what?" she challenged, her fear finally giving way to a surge of frustration. "A captive? A future wife who never agreed to any of this?" Tahoe stood up, a tall, imposing silhouette against the star-dusted sky. "You are not a prisoner," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You are a guest of the chief. You are free to choose your path." He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "Tomorrow I will show you something. Then, perhaps, you will understand." Before the sun had even touched the horizon, Luna woke her. The old woman helped her dress not in her own torn and dirty clothes, but in a soft buckskin dress and moccasins that fit as if they were made for her. They were simple, but comfortable. Outside, Tahoe was waiting with 2 horses. He helped her mount, his hand briefly brushing hers, sending an unexpected jolt through her. They rode in silence, climbing higher and higher into the mountains. The air grew thin and crisp. Finally, they reached a high ridge. Tahoe dismounted and led her to the edge of a cliff. The view stole her breath away. Below them, a vast valley stretched out, a patchwork of greens and golds under the rising sun. "This is the land of my fathers," Tahoe said, his voice filled with a deep reverence. For generations, the Apache roamed free, from these mountains to the great desert. We followed the buffalo, we lived with the land. Now, the white man comes. He builds his iron roads. He cuts down the ancient trees. He kills the buffalo for their hides and leaves the meat to rot. He turned to face her, and the pain in his dark eyes was raw and real. My people are disappearing, like the morning mist on the river. I am their chief. I must find a way for us to live in this new world, or we will all die. And you think marrying me, a white woman, will help that? Sarah asked softly, the pieces starting to click into place. You know the white man's ways, he said, his gaze intense. You can read the strange marks on their paper. You speak with words that can be twisted into traps. You can help my people understand their treaties, so we are not cheated again. You can be our voice. He hesitated, then added, his voice barely a whisper. And I see goodness in you. I see respect. Not like the soldiers who see only savages, or the traders who sell us whiskey to steal our minds. Sarah stared out at the valley, a dawning understanding washing over her. This wasn't about a bride. This was about survival. You don't want a wife, she said, looking back at him. You want an interpreter, an ambassador. I want a partner, Tahoe corrected gently. An equal. Someone to stand beside me, in the eyes of our people and in the eyes of the spirits. They stood there for a long time, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the pines. For the first time, Sarah saw him. Not the fearsome Apache chief, not her captor, but a man carrying the impossible weight of his people's future on his shoulders, a leader desperate to keep his world from vanishing forever. There is something else, he said finally, leading her back to the horses. They rode for another hour, descending into a small, hidden valley with a sparkling stream and lush green grass, and there, grazing peacefully, was a small herd of cattle. Maybe 30 or so, but they looked healthy and strong. These are yours? She asked, completely bewildered. Tahoe nodded. I traded for them. I am learning the white man's way of ranching. When the buffalo are all gone, my people must still eat. When the government forces us onto a small piece of land, we must know how to make it feed us. You're preparing for the future, she breathed, the scope of his vision stunning her. You're adapting. We must adapt or die, Tahoe said simply, like the wolf who learns to hunt in a new forest when his old one burns down. As they rode back to the village, Sarah's world had been turned upside down yet again. This man, this supposed savage, was a visionary, a pragmatist, a leader who was willing to do whatever it took, even embrace the ways of his enemies, to save his people. He wasn't trying to fight the future, he was trying to build a bridge to it, and he had asked her to be the architect. That night, when Luna brought her the evening meal, Sarah used the few Apache words she knew. She asked the old woman to teach her more. Luna's eyes, usually so serious, crinkled at the corners with surprise and delight. A new lesson had begun. The weeks that followed were a time of profound change for Sarah. She threw herself into learning the Apache language and customs. She discovered the deep spiritual beliefs that connected them to every rock, every tree, every animal. She learned that Tahoe had spent a short time at a mission school as a boy before running away, which explained his command of English. But she learned something else too, something that broke her heart. Luna, through a combination of gestures and their growing shared vocabulary, told her about Tahoe's first wife, and his infant son. They had been killed 5 years earlier, not in a battle, but in a surprise cavalry attack on a peaceful winter camp. The soldiers had ridden in at dawn, firing indiscriminately. The grief from that loss, Luna explained, was what had forged the laughing boy she remembered into the hard, stern leader he was today. The weight he carried was not just for his people, but for the family he had lost. One afternoon, a commotion at the edge of the camp shattered the peace. A group of warriors returned from a hunt, carrying one of their own. The young man was bleeding badly. Sarah recognized him as Nal, Tahoe's cousin. Without a second thought, her old life snapped into focus. "Bring him to my wickiup," she commanded, her voice clear and steady. The nursing skills her mother had taught her back in Boston came rushing back. For hours, she worked tirelessly alongside Luna. Nal had a deep gash in his side, and a bullet wound in his shoulder. Tahoe stood in the doorway, a silent, grim statue, watching her every move. With steady hands, Sarah cleaned the wounds, used a heated knife to carefully extract the bullet, and then stitched the skin together with a thin strand of sinew, just as she'd seen her mother do countless times. When it was over, Nal was resting, his fever high, but his breathing steady. Exhausted, Sarah stepped out of the wickiup into the cool night air. Tahoe was still there, waiting for her. "How did you know to do this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "My mother was a nurse during the war," she explained, washing the blood from her hands. "I learned from her." He nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face. "You have saved my cousin's life. My family, and my tribe, are in your debt." Later that night, as Sarah was about to fall into an exhausted sleep, Luna appeared at her doorway. The old woman said nothing. She simply stepped forward and placed a beautiful, intricately beaded necklace around Sarah's neck. Then she touched Sarah's cheek, a gesture of profound affection and gratitude, before turning and leaving as silently as she had come. Sarah held the smooth, cool beads in her hand. This was more than a gift. It was a symbol, a message. She was no longer the white captive. She was no longer just a guest. In the eyes of these people, she was becoming one of them. She was the bridge Tahoe had seen in his vision. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, for the first time since she'd arrived in this harsh and beautiful land, she felt like she might finally be home. But a new threat was gathering on the horizon, a storm of blue-coated soldiers who didn't care about visions or bridges. They only cared about orders, and their orders were to clear the land, by any means necessary. Autumn set the mountains ablaze with color. Sarah's place within the tribe was no longer a question. Her healing skills had earned her a deep respect that went beyond her connection to the chief. The children, who had once hidden from her, now followed her everywhere, begging for stories about the great cities in the east. She was a part of this world now, woven into the fabric of their lives. One crisp morning, while gathering herbs on a hillside with two other women, Sarah saw a flicker of movement in the valley below. It was a column of riders. Her blood ran cold when she saw the glint of the sun on metal and the dark blue of their uniforms. "Cavalry. We have to warn the others," she said, her voice tight with urgency. The women didn't need a translation. They scooped up their baskets and ran, their moccasins flying over the rocky ground. By the time they reached the village, Tahoe and a dozen warriors were already moving to the entrance, rifles in hand. Sarah pushed through the anxious crowd to stand beside him. "What do they want?" she whispered. Tahoe's jaw was a hard line. "We will listen to their words." A detachment of soldiers, maybe 20 in all, halted a respectful distance away. A young lieutenant dismounted and walked toward them, his hand held up in a sign of peace. He stopped a few paces from Tahoe. "Chief Wakan," the officer said, his voice polite but firm. "I'm Lieutenant James Foster, from Fort Grant. We're here about a missing settler woman." Sarah felt Tahoe go rigid beside her. "We have reports that a woman named Sarah Miller was taken from Willow Creek during the recent raid," the lieutenant continued, his eyes scanning the faces in the crowd. "Her uncle has filed a formal petition with the territorial governor. He's demanding her immediate return." Before Tahoe could speak, before a single warrior could raise a weapon, Sarah stepped forward into the open space between them. The sun was warm on her face, but her heart was hammering. "I am Sarah Miller, Lieutenant." The young officer's jaw dropped. He stared at her buckskin dress, at the Apache necklace she wore. "Ma'am? Are you all right? Are you being held here against your will? We're here to take you home." In that moment, Sarah felt the pull of two worlds. She saw the suspicion in the soldiers' eyes. She saw the worried faces of the Apache, who had become her family. And she saw Tahoe's face, a mask of stone that betrayed nothing of the storm she knew must be raging inside him. "I was not taken, Lieutenant," she said, choosing her words with extreme care. "I was rescued. The men who attacked Willow Creek were not Apache. They were white bandits disguised as Indians. Chief Watkins saved my life and brought me here for my own protection." But there was a new, dangerous variable she hadn't counted on. Lieutenant Foster wasn't just any soldier. He had a history in this territory. A dark one. "That may be, ma'am," Foster insisted. But his eyes held a flicker of something cold and hard. "But your uncle is at Fort Grant now, recovering from his injuries. He's very anxious to see you. My orders are to escort you to him. Immediately." This was a trap. She could feel it. But her uncle was alive, and he was asking for her. How could she refuse? She glanced at Tahoe. He gave no sign, but she had learned to read the subtle tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "May I speak with Chief Waken privately for a moment?" she asked the lieutenant. Foster frowned. "Of course. But make it quick. We're not leaving without you." Sarah and Tahoe walked a short distance away, their backs to the soldiers. The entire village watched them, silent and tense. "My uncle is alive," she said in a low voice, a mix of Apache and English. "I have to go. I have to make sure he's okay." "You wish to leave us," Tahoe stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion, which was more terrifying than any anger. "I wish to see my family," she corrected gently. "And maybe I can do more good for your people if I can speak to the men in charge, if I can tell them the truth." Tahoe's eyes searched her face, looking for a lie, for a crack in her resolve. "You think these soldiers will simply let you return here once you are in their fort?" The thought hadn't occurred to her. She had been naive. "They won't stop me," she said, with more confidence than she felt. After a long, heavy silence, Tahoe gave a single sharp nod. "A person must walk the path their own heart chooses. If the spirits intend for you to return, they will guide your feet." His gaze dropped to the necklace she wore. "Wear this," he said, his voice now a low rumble, "so you remember the people who call you sister." The ride to Fort Grant was a nightmare of forced politeness. Lieutenant Foster kept trying to talk to her, his questions dripping with condescending pity. "It's a common phenomenon, Miss Miller," he said, his tone like a doctor explaining a disease. "Stockholm Syndrome. Captives often develop a misplaced sympathy for their captors. Once you're back among your own kind for a while, these confused feelings will fade away." Sarah just bit her tongue and stared at the horizon. Arguing would be pointless. It would only confirm his diagnosis of her as a poor, brainwashed woman. Fort Grant was even more grim than she'd imagined. A high wooden wall surrounded a collection of drab buildings, making it feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. As they rode through the main gate, a wave of claustrophobia washed over her. After months in the open mountains, these walls felt like they were squeezing the air from her lungs. Her uncle was in the infirmary, his leg propped up on a stack of pillows. His face, usually so stern, crumpled with relief when he saw her. "Sarah, thank God. I thought they'd—" He reached for her, his hands trembling. She hugged him gently. "I'm okay, Uncle. The Apache saved me. The raiders were white men." His face instantly hardened. "Don't you defend those savages, girl. I know what they are. I know what they do to our women." He shuddered. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "Chief Wakan protected me. They treated me with respect." "Wakan!" Her uncle spat the name like poison. "That devil has been the terror of this territory for years. The army is just waiting for an excuse to break that useless peace treaty and lock his whole murderous tribe up on a reservation where they belong." Sarah pulled back, stunned by the venom in his voice. This wasn't just fear or prejudice. This was a deep, personal hatred. The arguments that followed over the next 2 days were draining and fruitless. Her uncle, the fort's doctor, even the commander, they all treated her like a child, a victim who didn't understand her own mind. They were convinced she'd been bewitched. And then she learned the truth. She overheard a conversation between 2 officers outside the commander's office. They were talking about Lieutenant Foster. They said he had a personal score to settle with Wakan's band, that his brother had been killed in a skirmish with the Apache years ago, a skirmish started by soldiers firing on a hunting party. Foster wasn't just following orders, he was on a mission of revenge. And that wasn't the worst part. They were planning an attack, a full-scale operation to surround Tahoe's village at dawn in just 2 days. They weren't going to negotiate. They were going to force a surrender, and if the Apache resisted, they would annihilate them. Her rescue was a lie. It was a pretext, a way to justify the coming slaughter. They needed the kidnapped white woman to make their story stick. She was not a guest at Fort Grant. She was a pawn. On the third morning, long before the first hint of dawn, Sarah made her choice. Using the stealth and silence she'd learned from the Apache, she slipped out of her room. She crept to the stables, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saddled a horse, her hands moving with a desperate speed. She had to get back. She had to warn them. She rode like the devil was chasing her, pushing the horse harder than she ever thought possible. She raced for the river crossing, the meeting point she'd given Tahoe. She prayed to a god she wasn't even sure she believed in anymore that his warriors would be there. As she galloped toward the large cottonwood tree, her heart sank. The clearing was empty. There was no one there. She was too late. They had given up on her. Just as despair began to set in, she heard it. A single bird call, crisp and clear in the morning air. It was too perfect, too precise. It was a signal. Two warriors melted out of the brush. One of them was Nal, his shoulder bandaged but his eyes clear and strong. He was healed. Because of her. Relief washed over her so intensely her knees went weak. "The soldiers are coming," she gasped, speaking in their language. "A large force. They plan to attack at dawn tomorrow. We have to warn Tahoe. We have to run." Nal's face turned to granite. Without a word, he pulled her onto his horse, and they flew toward the mountains, toward the village, toward the coming storm. When they arrived, Tahoe was waiting for them at the edge of the camp, as if he'd known all along she would return. For a brief, unguarded moment, his eyes lit up with a fierce relief. Then the mask slammed back down as she poured out her warning. "You risked your life to bring us this news," he said when she had finished, his voice a low growl. "Why?" Sarah met his intense gaze and spoke the truth that had taken her so long to understand. "Because this is my home now. Because you are my people." And for the first time, the fierce warrior chief, Tahoe, smiled. It was a small thing, but it transformed his entire face, erasing the years of grief and hardship, and revealing the man he might have been. The man he could still be. "Then we prepare for war," he said, turning to his warriors. "And when we are safe, you and I will speak of the future. A future that we will build together." The Apache village did not panic. It moved. Through the long night, it became a silent, efficient hive of activity. There were no wasted movements, no raised voices. This was a dance they had been forced to learn over generations of persecution. Women packed dried food and essential tools. Warriors checked their weapons and prepared the horses. Children were bundled into warm blankets, their wide, dark eyes reflecting the grim determination of their parents. Sarah worked alongside Luna, her hands moving with a sureness that surprised even herself. She helped the elderly. She secured precious bundles of healing herbs, and she showed the younger women which plants to gather quickly as they fled. "You have the Apache heart now," Luna said, her voice raspy but clear. She placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "My son's vision was true. He saw with his spirit, not just his eyes." Tahoe was a whirlwind of command, directing the evacuation with a calm authority that inspired confidence in everyone around him. He paused for a moment beside Sarah. "We will go to the high canyon," he told her. "It is a secret place, an ancient place. The soldiers' horses cannot follow the trail." "Will everyone make it?" she asked, looking at the very old and the very young. "We are Apache," he said, a fire lighting his eyes. "We move like the wind before the storm. We leave nothing behind." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "You came back to us." "I gave you my word," she replied simply. Suddenly, a cry from a lookout on the ridge shattered the night. A young warrior sprinted into the camp, his chest heaving. The soldiers were moving faster than they'd anticipated. An advance scout party, led by Lieutenant Foster himself, was already in the foothills, just a few hours behind them. They were cutting off the easier escape routes. "We go now!" Tahoe's voice boomed through the camp. "Leave what cannot be carried. The spirits will provide." The retreat began instantly. a long, silent line of people melting into the darkness of the forest. Sarah helped Luna onto a gentle mare, and then swung onto her own horse, falling into line behind Tahoe. As they moved away, she took one last look back at the village, at the warm glow of the dying cook fires, at the little wickiup that had been her home. A home more real to her than the cold house in Boston or her uncle's dusty trading post had ever been. Tahoe led them on a path that seemed impossible. Through narrow ravines where the horses scraped against rock walls, and up steep game trails that no army could ever hope to follow. After hours of relentless travel, they reached a series of sharp switchbacks climbing a sheer mountain face. "From here we walk," Tahoe announced. "The sound of hooves on this stone will carry for miles." The tribe dismounted. The warriors led the horses away, slapping their flanks to send them scattering in different directions down the mountain, a false trail to confuse and delay their pursuers. The climb that followed was brutal. Sarah's lungs burned in the thin air, and her muscles screamed in protest. She locked her arm with Luna's, the two of them giving each other strength, step by agonizing step. Just as the first pale light of dawn began to silhouette the jagged peaks, they arrived. Tahoe led them through a narrow crack in a cliff wall, a passage so thin they had to turn sideways to get through. And then it opened up. They were in a hidden canyon, a lost world. Sheer rock walls soared hundreds of feet on all sides, protecting a small, fertile valley floor. A clear stream bubbled up from a spring, and built into the cliff faces were ancient stone dwellings, the homes of a people long vanished. It was a natural fortress, a sanctuary. "The place of the ancestors," Luna whispered to Sarah, her voice filled with awe. "A sacred place. We will be safe here." While the women and children began to make a new camp in the ancient homes, Tahoe and his warriors took up defensive positions, watching the single narrow entrance. Sarah found a sheltered alcove and began laying out her herbs and medical supplies. She was no longer a guest. She was the tribe's healer. By noon, scouts reported the predictable news. Foster's cavalry had found the abandoned village. Now they were spreading out, searching for the trail. They were hunting them. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time. Foster's hatred would make him relentless. He wouldn't give up easily. As evening fell, casting long purple shadows across the canyon, Tahoe called a council of the tribal elders. To Sarah's shock, he gestured for her to join them. She sat among the stern, weathered men as they debated their options in the Apache tongue. She could now understand most of it. The younger warriors, like Nal, were full of fire. They wanted to set an ambush, to fight back, to make the soldiers pay in blood for this persecution. "An attack will only bring more soldiers," an older, wiser elder argued. "We cannot win a war against the white man's army. We will be wiped out." "So we hide in these mountains forever?" Nal shot back. "We let them take our land, our lives, and we do nothing?" The argument grew heated. Finally, Tahoe raised his hand, and silence fell. "Fighting is the path of death," he said, his voice heavy. "More of our children will die. More of our women will weep. It is not the way." He then did something that stunned the entire council. He turned to Sarah. "You know the white man's laws. You know his ways. Is there another path? A way to fight with words instead of arrows?" Every eye in the circle turned to her. The future of these people, their very survival, rested on her answer. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. "There are treaties," she began slowly, "but they are often broken. There is their government, but it is often deaf. But there are some good men among them. Men who believe in justice. There are newspapers that will print the truth if someone is brave enough to tell it. There are lawyers who will fight for the rights of your people in their courts." "And how do we find these men from a hidden canyon?" one of the elders asked, his voice thick with skepticism. Sarah straightened her back. The scared girl from Boston was gone. In her place was a woman who had found her purpose. "I will find them," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she possessed. "I can write letters. I can tell our story. My uncle, for all his hatred, is known by the territorial governor. If I can make them understand that Foster is acting out of personal revenge, That we are the victims of the bandits, not allies. Maybe they will listen. The council was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, Luna, who had been sitting quietly in the back, spoke. Her voice was old, but it carried an undeniable authority. "The spirits sent this woman to us," she said, her dark eyes finding Sarah's. "My son's vision was not just of a wife. It was of a bridge. She is the bridge between our dying world and the one that is to come. We must trust her." Tahoe looked at Sarah, and in his eyes she saw not just hope, but a deep, unwavering faith in her. "It is decided," he announced to the council. "We will follow this path of words. We will give peace one last chance before we embrace the path of blood." Later that night, Sarah sat with Tahoe by a small, secluded fire. He was carving a piece of wood, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he shaped it. "What if your plan fails?" he asked quietly, not looking up from his work. "What if their ears are closed to your words?" Sarah watched the infinite tapestry of stars appear in the sliver of sky visible above the canyon. "Then we will find another way," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And another after that. I will not abandon this family, Tahoe. Not ever." He set down his carving. It was a small, perfect eagle, just like the one inside the medicine pouch Luna had given her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingertips sending a shiver through her. "When I first took you from the fire and smoke," he said, his voice a low whisper, "I thought the spirits were sending me a wife to heal my own heart. Now I see the truth was much bigger. They sent you to help me heal my people." "Perhaps," Sarah said, leaning into his touch. "Both can be true." A slow smile spread across his face. "The Apache chief asks," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "would the woman from Boston be willing to choose a hard life, walking a difficult path with a man caught between two worlds?" Sarah covered his hand with her own, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "She would," she whispered, "if that man would walk beside her, as an equal, as they build a bridge to a new world. Together." The next morning, by the light of the rising sun, Sarah began to write. She wrote to the territorial governor, describing in clear, factual detail the bandit attack and Lieutenant Foster's personal vendetta. She wrote to the editors of newspapers in Tucson and Santa Fe, telling the story of a peaceful people being hunted for a crime they did not commit. And finally, she wrote a long, heartfelt letter to her uncle, pleading with him to look past his hatred and see the truth. Nale, brave and loyal, volunteered for the dangerous mission of delivering the letters. Tahoe held a solemn ceremony, painting symbols of protection on his cousin's arms, and asking the spirits to make him as swift and unseen as the wind. Then, Nal slipped through the crack in the canyon wall and disappeared. All they could do now was wait. The days in the hidden canyon crawled by, each one a lifetime of tension and hope. The scouts reported that Foster, enraged at losing their trail, had doubled his patrols. His men were scouring the mountains with a grim determination, but the canyon held its secrets. During this time of waiting, the bond between Sarah and Tahoe deepened into something powerful and unbreakable. They were no longer just a chief and his advisor. They were true partners. They spent hours talking, planning, dreaming of a future. Not a return to the past, but something new. A community where the Apache could raise the cattle Tahoe had started with, where they could grow crops, and where their children could learn to read and write in both English and their own language. A place where they could be strong in both worlds. Sarah would be their teacher. Tahoe would be their leader. Together, they would guide their people. One morning, nearly 2 weeks after Nale had left, a scout reported a single rider approaching the outer canyons. It wasn't a soldier. The man was a civilian, riding a mule, and carrying a white flag of truce. Warriors brought him, blindfolded, through the winding passages and into the sanctuary of the canyon. When they removed the blindfold, Sarah gasped. She knew this man. It was James Morgan, a lawyer from Tucson famous throughout the territory for one shocking reason. He believed in justice for the native tribes. "Miss Miller," Morgan said, tipping his hat. His eyes were full of respect. "Your letters, to put it mildly, have caused an absolute firestorm." Hope, bright and fierce, surged in Sarah's chest. "The governor was furious when he read your account," Morgan continued. "He launched a full investigation into Lieutenant Foster's command, but it was your uncle's letter that changed everything. He walked into the governor's office and finally confessed the truth. He admitted the raiders were white men. He even identified one of them." "And the bandits?" Tahoe asked, stepping forward. "Captured," Morgan said with a grin. "A nasty gang led by a man named Jedediah Harkins. They've been wanted in 3 territories. Under interrogation, they confessed to everything, including disguising themselves as Apache to stir up trouble and cover their tracks. Lieutenant Foster has been recalled and is facing a court-martial." A wave of joyous murmurs spread through the gathered Apache. Morgan then turned directly to Tahoe. "Chief Wakan, the governor has sent me to make you an offer. He has authorized a new treaty, not a reservation, but a formal land grant. A territory of your own, in the valley of your choosing, with secured water rights and legal protection under territorial law." Tahoe's face remained impassive, his eyes hard. "The white man's promises are like smoke. They vanish when you try to hold them." "This one will be different," Morgan assured him. "It will be signed by the governor, witnessed by a federal judge, and recorded in the territorial capital." He then smiled, a twinkle in his eye as he looked back at Sarah. "And it will include a special provision. An official, paid position for a Mrs. Sarah Miller Wakan, to serve as the permanent liaison and ambassador between the Apache Nation and the territorial government." Sarah's jaw dropped. She quickly translated for the Council of Elders, who broke into wide, incredulous smiles. How did you know?" she asked Morgan, instinctively touching the simple, beaded band that Tahoe had placed on her wrist just days before, a private pledge of their future union. The lawyer's smile widened. "In his confession, your uncle mentioned that you had written to him of your intention to marry the chief. He said if you were brave enough to build a bridge between 2 peoples, the least he could do was help you lay the first stone." Weeks later, as the first gentle snows of winter kissed the high peaks, Tahoe's people made their home in a new valley. It was the beautiful, fertile land he had once shown Sarah, the one he was trying to save. A simple ceremony, blending the sacred traditions of the Apache with the familiar words from Sarah's past, united them as husband and wife. Luna blessed them with eagle feathers, and James Morgan signed the official document as their witness. That evening, Sarah and Tahoe stood outside their new home, a sturdy cabin built with timber, but shaped like a traditional wickiup, a perfect fusion of their 2 worlds. The sunset painted the snow-covered mountains in brilliant strokes of crimson and gold. "The spirits knew what they were doing when they led me to you," Tahoe said, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. Sarah laughed and leaned her head against his strong shoulder. "They sent a stubborn Boston woman to tame a fierce Apache warrior." "Or," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble, "perhaps we tamed each other. And in doing so, we found a strength neither of us knew we had." As the stars began to glitter in the vast, clear sky, Sarah thought about the impossible journey that had brought her from a Boston parlor to this wild, magnificent land. It wasn't the life she had ever imagined for herself. It was so much more. Here, caught between 2 worlds, she and the man she loved would build their bridge, a small beacon of hope and understanding in a land that desperately needed it. They were home. If you enjoyed Sarah's incredible story of courage and finding a home in the most unexpected of places, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. And let me know in the comments below, what was the most shocking twist for you? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.